whatever is our most dominant state is how we're going to experience life. So when we consider combat sports athletes and that we like to be in struggle, a lot of the time I see people diminish their ability to actually do as well as they could do because their attachment to struggle, their attachment to being the hardest worker in the room actually has them create circumstances where it's way harder than it needs to be.
Wow.
Right? So the work that
Fascinating.
I do is like, how can we have you embody being someone who wins effortlessly, has the capacity to struggle, has the capacity to put in the work, but only calls on that when they need to.
Welcome to the EQ Gangster podcast, where you will learn practical tools to grow your mental and emotional health and intelligence to be the best version of yourself, both at work and at home. It is real, raw, and transformational. The journey of emotional growth isn't easy, but it's worth it. I believe in you.
Hey, Hannah, what's up?
How you doing?
It's great to meet you.
Likewise.
Awesome in the virtual flesh.
Right? So good. How
That's
lucky are we
great.
to have tech?
This is awesome. I'm so stoked to interview you.
Me too.
Is it day or night? What time is it there?
It's 11 p.m. here.
Oh,
So
snap.
use the tired eyes.
So
I'll try to be as like on as I can be.
that's right. So, oh man, okay. So, like, how did you jump? How did you get into this world of, studying your nervous system and being a performance coach and stuff? How did you get into this world?
The short version is that so I came from bodybuilding. I was competing in bodybuilding. Um, and at the same time I was working as a personal trainer dealing with like weight loss clients. And so coming out of my very first fitness modeling competition, I don't know how much you know about bodybuilding, but like you cut down to some really intensely lean, body fat percentages, and then you kind of go back to looking like a normal human being to some degree, right? And so there was this whole internal kind of battle, this internal conflict of seeing myself put on weight. And even though I just went back to looking like a normal person, but going from so lean to like so normal, it was really confronting. It was really full on. And at the same time, I was working with, as I said, a number of weight loss clients who I just sort of started to notice patterns where it was like, some people would have really incredible weight loss results and then keep the weight off. Others didn't get any results at all. Others did get results, but then stacked it all back on. And it wasn't until there was one day in particular where I was working with a client who he'd lost 50 kilos. So he'd gone from being 130 kilos down to 80 kilos. I don't know what that is in pounds, forgive me. And his next goal was that he wanted to work towards being able to do pull-ups. So I got him on the assisted pull-up machine and he didn't want to get on the machine. And I was like, why? He's like, I'm going to break it. I'm like, dude, you're 80 kilos. Like that's an average size. You're not going to break it. He's like, no, I'm going to break it. And I realized in that moment that even though his body had changed mentally, he was still 130 kilos. So that led me down this really deep dive into mindset. And and I had the pleasure of utilizing that with my clients at the time. And then I started to notice that even the mindset stuff was kind of capped. Like I'd get results for myself, I get results from my clients, but it was like there was just this glass ceiling that I couldn't push through. And so I started to look at, well, like what's there beyond the mindset? And it's the somatics, it's looking at the nervous system, it's looking at our senses and the way that the nervous system experiences things, and our body's capacity to hold particular experiences, to hold discomfort, to hold things that are unfamiliar or that feel overwhelming or intense, or, you know, even the things that we want more of, like if more money or more intimacy or whatever it may be, if we don't know how to hold it, if it's not familiar, it's scary, you know. So yeah, it was kind of a bit of a step-by-step process, and that's the short version.
That's awesome. I love it. So would emotions fall under the nervous system?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Because so this is fascinating. So I popped out of my mom Chubbalicious. Okay, so I've always had extra real estate. You know what I'm saying? Always. And so, but what's funny is, it's to your point is, well, so oh man, this is really, I may experience my nervous system may get activated during this conversation because of my relationship with food. So, and my body, right? And so I've always had my narrative has always been, dude, you're fatty McFatty, always, since I was born. And it's funny is, looking back, when I feel, and pretty much I have always my entire life felt fat, basically, and overweight. And I have been to a degree. But when I look back and see pictures, I'm like, I was skinny there. Like, I was legit skinny, but the narrative, the story is like, dude, I'm like 100 pounds overweight. You're the fattest. Like, how can you even walk? Right. Just really, really negative self-condemnation, self-hatred. And and then you think, just from a logical perspective, well, how, if you're constantly telling yourself that you suck and you're overweight and you're fat and you're disgusting, all this negative playlist that I had running, how excited is your body, or how motivated are you going to be to improve if you're constantly beating yourself down the whole time, right? And the emotion. So this other thing I've noticed, I want to get your thoughts on this. So it's almost like, and then, so one other quick history about my family of origin. My dad was an emergency room doctor. So I mean, probably one of the most stressful jobs you could have in the jobs world. And the way, and I didn't know this when I was growing up as a kid, but the way he would process his emotions or deal with his emotions, let me say it that way, was through eating. He always ate. So he was a big guy, 6'4", 285 pounds, big dude. And I'd see him come home from a shift and just immediately just start grazing. So guess what? So my whole childhood, I didn't even know I was doing that, right? But if anytime I would feel intensity, boom, just start shovel, and did not even become aware of my emotions or feelings until probably 5 to 10 years ago, when I started this whole journey. And the other thing I was going to say about that is that what I've noticed is it's almost like I feel like we have a package of emotions or responses that are almost set in our nervous system based on the different categories of life. So relationships, family, food, fitness, right? Whatever the categories are, faith, whatever. And we have this standard package of, for me, all my emotions about my body and food was all negative, right? So have you, like, am I smoking crack on any of that stuff, or is it like congruent with what you've experienced in your clients and stuff? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's all, like, I hate to kind of compress it all down into just this, but it's all very common, you know, like you're not it's not a rarity. Everything you've said there, I'm like, yeah, like stock standard, same stuff, you know. And part of it, like, there's a lot of it's almost an element underneath nervous system regulation that I work on. And it also kind of encompasses and interweaves with nervous system regulation, but it's self-concept, right? And so you mentioned there, like, that your whole life you've been overweight, that, you know, and that's just how you identify. And so, you know, like, if your self-concept is that of someone who is overweight, then you're going to, interact with the world, you're going to interact with yourself, you're going to have belief systems and behavioral patterns and so on that confirm that self-concept. And so some of the work that I do with people, and for example, like with athletes, it's getting them to have the self-concept of a champion. When I work with entrepreneurs, if the goal is to become a 6-7 figure business owner, it's building the self-concept of a 6 or 7 figure business owner. When it comes to weight loss, it's building the self-concept of someone who is healthy, slim, athletic, whatever the thing may be. So there's like everything you mentioned there is self-concept work. And I mean, as you've said, like we have these, whether they're learnt behaviors, be it from some sort of a trauma or some sort of a stressor that we've been through, when we're young, that has us, like turn to food, for example, when we're stressed, or be it something that we've observed. So we've learned it from, like you said, from parents. We get these kind of like wired in patterns that we just do them on autopilot, like, and if we've never caught them, we've never caught them. I know for a long time mine was much like you. It was food. It was, if there's something that feels overwhelming, then it's I'll snack. I'll go and snack. For a long time, it was I'll go to the gym and I'll just escape it by going to the gym. And it wasn't until I actually started to notice, when I go into a freeze response, when I go into shutdown, when I'm looking to disassociate, like I try and fill myself up with food so that it's like pushing everything back down so that I don't have to notice it. So yes,
That's
very stock
awesome.
standards you mentioned.
So what have you found? So in my world of emotional intelligence, that's kind of the space that I'm in, is emotional intelligent leadership and stuff. I'm big on tools, practical tools that my clients can immediately apply, like emotional push-ups, right? Emotional sit-ups, emotional bench press, whatever. And what have you found to be maybe one or two practical tools to help somebody change or improve their self-concept?
Yeah. Brilliant question. I think the first thing is actually like identify, like, what do you want instead? Right? I think a lot of the time, like, we're trained as humans to actually put all of the emphasis and all of the focus and all of our attention on the thing that we don't want. So if I may, to use yourself as an example, if your self-concept is someone that's overweight, the emphasis of your attention is, like, this is who I've been my whole life, and these are my eating behaviors, and so on, and shame or guilt or whatever it may be that comes attached to that. And so if our focus and our attention is on that, we're just getting more of that. And so the first piece is actually figuring out, well, like, who do you want to be? Like, what is the ideal? If you could have everything your way, who would you want to be? And once we've got that framework, then we start to give the nervous system. So the nervous system learns through experience, right? And so a lot of the time for yourself, if you've never had the experience before of being someone who is slim or athletic or whatever the ideal is for you, the nervous system's like, that's not safe, right? Like, that's unfamiliar. That's not safe. The attention that might come with that, the uncertainty that might come with that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's not a safe place for you to go. So we've actually got to start to, I call it building the body. We've actually got to start to like build a connection somatically with that experience. So some of this could be actually like visualizing and playing with, like, okay, so if I was these things that I desire to be, if I was the ideal, what's that going to feel like? What are some of the negatives that are going to come as a result of that? And what's that going to feel like? How am I going to hold that experience? How am I going to respond to that experience? And actually, like, Dr. Joe Dispenza talks a lot about this, like really letting yourself have the experience before it shows up in reality, because our system can't tell the difference, right? So we want to experience it first, create safety around it, create familiarity around it, so that then you can start to kind of bridge the gap and start to bring some of those behaviors across to the here and now. And then the other piece is, you know, and it takes practice, right? That's one thing I really want to hit home here. This takes practice, and it takes really being quite diligent in looking at who you're being, and looking at thinking about what you're thinking about what you're feeling, thinking about what state you're embodying, but really practicing, you know, holding yourself, like your posture, your communication style, like the things that you do, the way you navigate your day, practicing doing it as the version of you that is already where you want to be. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely. And yeah, that's great. You know, so I do jujitsu. Big Chad is my he was one of my professors at one of my previous gym. We've moved since, so we're not close to them anymore. But Chad and Jade are just great, wonderful people, and he's, you know, an incredible jujitsu athlete. Both of them are. Jade is unbelievable in her own right, and one of the things that, you know, I watch jujitsu all the time. Unfortunately, it doesn't translate, which is kind of my point. It doesn't necessarily translate to being better at jujitsu, but I watch it all the time. But here's, I guess, two connections. One is, in order to get better at jujitsu, so to be a champion, I'm going to use that analogy there, that connection. I have to practice jujitsu. And what's crazy is that I'm learning about jujitsu. I'm 8 years in. I've been doing it for 8 years, which is, you know, a decent chunk of time. It's unbelievable, in my opinion, how long it takes to approach any type of mastery in jujitsu. We'll use that again because that's what's familiar to me. So, but my point is Noble has to do a truckload of reps to get better at jujitsu. And I would even argue, not even jujitsu, to get better at one little sliver of jujitsu, I have to practice that specific thing. So in terms of this champion practice, mindset, self-concept deal, I can imagine that would take, like, to your point earlier, like, this is not like, oh, I visualize being a champion, so I'm a champion. Like, no, like, I still get tapped out 800 times, right? So you need a truckload of reps. Okay, so that's one point. The other point that I think watching a bunch of jujitsu has maybe given me, which I never thought about this until our conversation. Well, I watch world-class jujitsu people. That's who I watch, is the world-class athletes. How do they act? What does a champion look like? Well, the good thing is, even though I haven't necessarily experienced that, you know, again, just using that analogy, a whole bunch in my life, some areas I have, but in jujitsu, I haven't really, but I know what they look like and how they act and how they walk, and I can watch videos on how they think and how, right? So it in my opinion, it shortens that distance. I at least have some file, right? Does that make sense? Is that helpful to do something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. The interesting thing, and this is why I love working with athletes, specifically combat sports athletes, because there's kind of a paradox that plays out in this realm. And that is that, like, I think we can all agree that someone who does a grappling sport, there's some part of them that enjoys struggle, right? Like, it's not an easy sport. There's, like, you're literally wrestling with another human being, like you're grappling, you know. So there's this element of struggle, there's this element of, like, tension, of hard work, of, you know, all of those and like the nuance of jiu-jitsu is just so complex that it's like you could be the best in the world and you're still never gonna master jiu-jitsu, you know. And so, and a lot of combat sports athletes really build their sense of self and their self-concept on how willing they are to struggle, right? And so one of the things that I really love to play around with when it comes to supporting someone who, say, is wanting to become a world champion or you know, is wanting to really like hone their craft as a competitor, is actually bringing an element of ease to jiu-jitsu. So for example, Gordon Ryan, that guy a lot of the time just makes it look outrageously easy. Like just, and that's, you know, like whatever is our most dominant state is how we're going to experience life. So when we consider combat sports athletes and that we like to be in struggle, a lot of the time I see people diminish their ability to actually do as well as they could do because their attachment to struggle, their attachment to being the hardest worker in the room actually has them create circumstances where it's way harder than it needs to be.
Wow.
Right? So the work that I do is like, how can we have you embody being someone who wins effortlessly, has the capacity to struggle, has the capacity to put in the work, but only calls on that when they need to. Right. And that's when, like, I mean, I don't know how much of like Chad's comps, I don't know if you're familiar with it, and Chad will be fine with me sharing this because it's public knowledge. Him and I did some work together, right? And I don't know whether you kind of had your eye on it, but it was like all of a sudden he just started winning comps really easily. And that was all just because we were like, okay, we're going to shift your self-concept to being the person who just like plays with their food when they go to comps, you know, like there's no struggle. We don't do that shit. Like we don't even work up a sweat when we compete, right? So this is what I really love with combat sports athletes, because it's so like it's a paradox. They're totally like extreme polarities. But when you bring them together, it's like if you've got someone who has the capacity to like just work themselves to the bone, but they know they don't have to, then you're unstoppable. And I think that's why someone like Gordon Ryan is so good at what he does, because he gets this.
Right. Well, it's funny. So this is really funny. So that concept I absolutely connect with, because as the oldest guy in the room 99% of the time in 99% of the gyms that I train at, you know, because I travel and I'll bring my gi and stuff and no gi stuff. I'm always one of the, if not the oldest guy in the room. And I can't physically go toe to toe with a 25-year-old Division I wrestler who is a blue belt in jiu-jitsu. I physically don't have the skill, stamp, you know, all the stuff. So the only way I can compete with these young animals is I stay calm and my breathing. The challenge that I give myself is never outperform my breathing, breathing through my nose. I only breathe through my nose. So if I start breathing through my mouth, I'm rolling too hard and I need to calm myself down. That's my trigger. It's like, oh, Briana's like getting me amped up. I gotta bring it back down. Because I don't want to roll at Briana's level. I want to roll at my level, which is calm, old, and slow. so, and what happens is that I can roll for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours straight if I wanted to. And I've done 30-minute rolls and 20-minute rolls. And I mean, man, I think my longest roll I've done is probably an hour and 15 minutes. Wow. But the only way I've been able to do that is because of my breathing. And it keeps me. So my connection to what you just said is that not that it's effortless, but it's the energy expenditure that my burn rate is like maybe 30 to 40%, with maybe a burst to 70% or
Yeah.
80%. But like you said, only when I need it. And literally it may be two, maybe 2 to 3 bursts of 2 seconds a pop for a full 6 minute round. So like the vast majority, I'm a very efficient roller. Let me say it that way. I roll very efficiently. I don't struggle. I'm calm. In fact, with a lot of the white belts, right, the white belt spaz, I will stop them in the middle of a round and say, listen to your breathing and
Mm.
listen to my breathing. You're literally 20 to 30 years younger than me. There's no scenario where I should be chill right now and you should be wearing yourself out.
Yeah.
Calm your breath, right? And I tell him, I said, look, your performance will match your breathing. If you
Yeah.
breathe spazzy, you perform spazzy. If you
Yeah.
breathe chill, then you perform chill, right? And you can, which I've also noticed seems to affect obviously my endurance, but also my stamina and resilience
Yeah.
when I maintain, and all that I just described is all nervous system stuff, right? That's all nervous system.
Yeah.
And,
100%.
and here's a question. Another question is, it has taken me a lot of, like, I would argue probably 1 to 2 years during my first 2 years, so my whole white belt season, if you will, before I was able to kind of master my breathing. It took 2 years of 4 days a week, 5 days a week in the gym doing, rolling, to like be able to control my nervous system. What are some ways people can learn to control their nervous system?
Yeah. I always suggest, and this all sounds, I'm aware it sounds very like quite dull, and I geek out on this stuff, but I always suggest to people to actually start to, I call it a nervous system map. And so to start to actually like create a document, like create a spreadsheet and start to actually track like what different states look like, right? And so, like if we think of, I always kind of split it into 4 different states. There are blended states, but that's getting a little bit more complex. But I think of, we've got our freeze state, which is when we shut down, like we're in complete overwhelm. Sometimes we disassociate, we freeze, right? Like you're in the headlights. We have our fight response, which is where most athletes fight from. And that is like your like high adrenaline, like go, 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 anxious energy, kind of like attack, 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 burn out really quick, right? That's your spazzy white belts most of the time. Then we have our flight response, which is very similar energy to fight, but instead of fight, it's get me out of here. And then we have our safety state, which is like, it looks slightly different for everyone, but I see it as like really chilled out, relaxed. Your breathing's, not like you're chilling, right? And so I always suggest to people to start to like actually look at, okay, well, what state am I in now? And what does that feel like? What thoughts are going through my head? What sensations am I noticing in my body? So I know for me, a freeze state, and to add on to that also, what behaviors do I start to display when I'm in these states? So I know clear as day, a freeze response for me, I start to feel weak, like physically, I start to feel like muscle fatigue. I start to feel like my limbs are heavy. My thought process starts to become a little bit like it's like everything's in slow motion, but not in a good way. Like it's that feeling, when you have a dream and you're like throwing a punch or something and it's like you're giving it your all and it's just like there's nothing behind it. It's that feeling. My thoughts are like that, and my thoughts start to drop into like more kind of like doom based, like what's the point? I'm never going to figure it out. I'm not good enough for this. And I know that my behaviors can start to come through as like quite shut down, like apathetic. I start to turn towards like food, Netflix, scroll holes on social media, etc., etc. I know fight for me looks like My palms get sweaty, my cheeks start to feel hot, like suddenly like it's a bit anxious, my thoughts are going to I'm starting to blame. And I know safety state for me, like I feel clear, I feel coherent, like I'm relaxed, I can be quite playful, and so when we can start to map these things out, something really cool happens because we can start to catch it before we're in it, right? Or before it kind of is bigger than us. So I can notice in jujitsu, like I have one of my professors, I roll with him regularly, and rolling with him is like the best way to describe it is like an anaconda just like slowly, just like squeezing, right? And so you're doomed, but it's like, it's it's not like a spazzy death, it's like just a slow drawn out death, right? And so I feel myself sometimes when I'm rolling with him start to go into this like spazzy, oh my God, like, but I can catch it because I start to go, oh, I'm feeling my breathing speed up, right? I'm noticing my heart rate sped up. Yeah. I'm noticing that I'm like starting to, like, my thoughts are starting to, turn into the frantic kind of like almost manic kind of thoughts that are, that go hand in hand with a fight response for me. And so I can see it before I'm in it. I can see it kind of unfolding. And so when we can do that, it creates a gap. So there is a gap between like when it's starting to happen and when it's like all encompassing. And that gap is the awareness where we can then actually jump in with our tools to shift it.
That is fire. I love that. So, and you call that a nervous system map.
Yeah.
Man, that is bad to the bone. I love that. So, so in my world, in order to create a nervous system map, you've got to work on your self-awareness, which all those different things. So that's part of the emotional intelligence piece, right? Is because pre-EQ days for me, pre-emotional intelligence days, I had zero self-awareness. Like
Yeah.
I knew I'm angry, I'm sad, or I'm happy. Like those are the three emotions that I knew. I didn't know.
Yeah.
And then if you ask me, like, where in your body are you feeling angry? Like,
Mm.
what are you talking about? Like all over, I had no, I had just, I literally was an emotional 5-year old as a 40-year-old, like
Yeah.
no joke. Right. So, but I think I think this concept of a nervous system map is a great way to start developing or continue developing one's self-awareness.
Yeah.
What emotional state am I in when I like there's I think you could even set some I think you could even set some scheduled check-ins, right? When I first wake up, okay, what emotional state am I in? What emotions are popping right now? How does my body feel? How did I sleep? Right before I go to bed, let me do a nervous state system check-in, right? Or, before I walk into a meeting, before I walk into work, before I come home from work, all those have potentials. We already probably, I never thought about this before, but for each of our daily transitions, again, waking up, getting ready for work, going to work, at work, going to a meeting, getting ready for a meeting, going to the meeting, being in the meeting, coming out of the meeting, transitioning home, right? All those we might have consistent nervous system maps that are just that package for that
Yeah.
particular, I would imagine, right? Something like that.
Yeah, totally.
Unless we're intentional at
Yes.
changing, like you said,
Yeah.
well, I don't want to be the spazzy white belt at work or at home with my spouse or with my kid, as a parent. I don't want to be the spazzy white belt because that there's nothing productive when
Yeah.
for me, when I'm emotionally hijacked or emotionally triggered, there's nothing positive or productive coming out of that. Right?
Exactly.
Nothing. There's nothing. It's all bad.com. It's all negative. There's nothing positive, right? That's fire, girl. That is fire. I love that.
Yeah. The really cool thing with this, right, is that, and I'm aware maybe getting into some like controversial topics here, but things like anxiety, depression, you know, like hopelessness, feelings of being stuck, all of that, they're actually symptoms of our state, right? So anxiety anxiety is just a symptom of a fight or flight response, right? Depression is a symptom of a freeze response. You know, ADHD, this one's super controversial, but ADHD, there's both that's a blended state. Most of the time ADHD is a mixture of freeze response and fight or flight. So the like chaos of ADHD with the disassociation of ADHD, like not being able to do the thing, that's your blended state. And so when we can see it as that, it's no longer I have depression. It's just I am currently in a state, or I'm predominantly in a state of freeze. I don't, you know, I'm not accessing my safety state often. Right. And so like, sorry, you go.
Well, and I think the skill would be when you notice that I'm in a fight, flight, or freeze state. How, my question, and tell me if I'm on track here, I don't want to be in those states. I want to operate life from my safety state, right? If I'm rolling with a black belt, a white belt, a purple belt, a 8th degree black belt, my state is the same. I'm not, 8 years in, I don't care. And maybe there's 6'5", 285 pound, 6th degree black belt, and I know I'm going to get destroyed. I know it. But because I have the tools to at least survive long enough, I don't get anxious rolling with a 6'5", 285 pound, 6th degree black belt, because I immediately go into my safety state of my breathing's controlled. I'm calm. I have my tools. Now they have more tools than I do, so I know the outcome is probably going to not go my way necessarily, right? But I'm, that whole experience is from a calm, safe place. It's not, I'm not freaking out. I'm not panicking. So am I right or not that the goal would be, if and when I find myself in one of those 3 states, fight, flight, or freeze, the skill is, well, there's a couple skills. Recognizing when I'm going into one of those states and then redirecting myself back to a safety state.
Yeah.
Or no?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah,
Okay.
I always suggest, you know, and this is, again, it takes practice, but it's, as I said earlier, it's that thing of like, a lot of the time, I'm mindful of how I communicate this. A lot of the time, like, we're so conditioned to just live in this perpetual state of fight, flight, freeze that we actually gain something from being in it. You know, if we come back to combat sports athletes, we get our sense of self from struggle. So a lot of combat sports athletes are in fight most of the time because that's where they get their sense of self, right? So it's kind of, it's getting really clear on, well, actually, how do I want to feel, right? If someone is happy in fight response, if they're happy to be the person who gets their sense of self from struggle, cool, you do you, right? Like if that's your thing, love that. And so there's an identification piece of like, well, how do I actually want to feel here, right? And so for me, I do this before I go into class, and I do this before each role most of the time. So like, for example, tonight I came from training before we jumped on this podcast, and I walked into training and I was like, okay, like, how do I want tonight? Like how am I feeling? What state am I in? Feeling good today. How do I want class to go? Like, what are the things I'm working on at the moment? Like, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And so my intention was that I wanted to know my power, and I wanted to be met in my power. And so that means that regardless of circumstance, I'm staying anchored, like I'm staying in safety state. So no matter what hard roll or whatever, I'm just there to have fun. I'm there to just stay chilled out. Nothing's going to move me off that. So I know what my desired or my ideal state is. So that gives me a place to put my focus so that when circumstances pop up that can derail me from that, I have my map. Like I know, like I have my true north, my North Star that I'm coming back to. Versus if I didn't have an intention, like if you don't know where you're looking to, then you're just, you're kind of a victim of circumstances. You're just being pulled wherever. And then like so you've got your ideal state, you've got the desired state, you've got your North Star, and then as you said, it's catching when you're shifting out of that, and then having your tools available to like redirect when it comes up.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay. Last comment on the nervous system. What's a piece of advice or insight or encouragement about either performance or our nervous system that could add value to the audience?
I want to say this because this is, and it connects with what you said at the beginning about some of the patterns you've taken on from your dad. So co-regulation, there's self-regulation, which is where we regulate ourselves, like we choose our state, we use our breathing or our thoughts or whatever, visualization, whatever it may be, to self-regulate. Co-regulation is where we regulate depending on where the rest of the tribe is, or a partner, or the kids, or the dog, or whatever. And so when we start to wrap our heads around our state, something really cool happens. And this is like, I'll preface, this is master level nervous system regulation. But something really cool happens in competition where, and you kind of, you framed it where, you said if you're up against like a wrestler who's like 25 years old, you're controlling your breathing. You're not focusing on him. You're not focusing on his strengths. You're not focusing on his performance, any of that. You're focusing on you. And so competitively, there's no greater head fuck than when the person you're rolling against is just like chilling. Right? And so something really cool happens in comps when you're so anchored in safety state and your opponent's like getting frustrated, or they're getting worn out, or they're getting tired, or whatever their thing may be. You can actually kind of play with your state, knowing they're going to regulate to you. So for example, I use this in one of my comps there's a video of it, which it's very cool to see. It's like I couldn't have got a better video in terms of like, here's an example of my work. It was my first ever no-gi match ever in my entire jiu-jitsu competitive career, which is a small career, if I'm honest. But I'd got this girl in an armbar, right? And we all know that battle when she had her arms locked up, right? So yeah, I'm in the dominant position, right? I've got this armbar and I caught it in the moment. I went, hang on, I'm fighting her here. Like I'm fighting for this. I'm in this scampery, anxious energy of like urgency. Like I've got to get this armbar. And it dawned on me, I was like, hang on, I'm in the dominant position here. She's the one that needs to be fighting. Like she's about to get subbed. And so something really cool, you can see it in the video. There is a moment where I'm scampering, I'm trying to get this, I'm trying to move her arms. And then I just stop and I shift my state. So you literally see me just go, I've got her arm and I'm like, and so I relax. And so co-regulation in mind, right? When I'm fighting for her arm, I'm in fight mode. She's in fight mode. I shift my state. I relax. Co-regulation, what does she do? She relaxes too. And she just gives her arm. She just lets go. Right? And you can see it. Like it's clear as day on the video. It's like I go, and she just goes, have it. Right? And so this is the really cool thing. When we play with like nervous system regulation, self-awareness, like understanding your states, understanding where like your peak state or your flow state is, like you can change the entire trajectory of a match just by playing around with that internal state. You know, you can literally shift the way your opponent performs based on like just shifting yourself. It's groundbreaking. I love it.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. I love this stuff. Okay. So, Briana, how do we follow you? How do we connect with you? What resources do you have? Websites, anything like that?
Yeah. So Briana Bowley on Instagram. I'm under Briana Laurel Bowley on Facebook. So that's Briana with so Briana, so one N. BrianaBowley.com for my website. I can't think of the link right now, but I'm more than happy to throw in. I've got a free masterclass on how to map out your nervous system. So I can send you the link after we jump off, and if you want to pop it in the show notes. But yeah, Briana Bowley on all socials.
And it's BrianaBowley for those of you all that are
Yeah.
listening and on YouTube and stuff. And IG, it's the same thing at Briana Bowley as well. So Briana, thank you so much. This was amazing. I can't wait to start doing my nervous system map. This was fire. So
Thank you.
excited to finally connect with you.
I know, so good.
Totally appreciate your time, Briana. Have an awesome day.
You too. Thanks, Noble.